Hey friends, welcome to Flight Test Tech. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Freedom Fox. Now if you haven't heard about the FT Freedom Fox, this is again another brand new chapter for Flight Test and also probably one of the most special projects we've ever worked on, mainly because we're working on this project with our good friend Trent Palmer, who actually flies a real full-scale Freedom Fox. If you guys haven't seen Trent Palmer and his amazing flying videos, basically he goes backcountry flying, has tons of awesome adventures with him and his wife and also many other great folks along the way, and shares those journeys with us. We were so inspired by his Freedom Fox, we wanted to make a scale model, and God bless him, he bought into this vision before we knew anything about P&P. And after a whole year of amazing work with Trent Palmer, we finally have the final product. Now this has a lot of really cool features that we're going to be covering in the actual vision video, but today what we're going to be showing you with this video is the build, the tune, and the fly. So basically we're going to be showing you how to assemble this Freedom Fox, we're going to show you how to set it up with the radios and the controls, get all the throws right, and then we're going to take you out to the field and show you tips and tricks on getting the best flying experience possible. So if you want to follow along with me, or even better, if you have that kit and ready to build along with me, let's get our materials in order and we'll get started. All right, so what we're going to do now is component identification. We're going to show each individual component, identify them for you, and also take that time to inspect them for damage. We want you guys to have an amazing experience and make sure everything's in order. All right, so we have our fuselage. Our fuselage is going to contain our magnetic battery hatch. Also inside is a pre-installed motor. Our ESC is already hooked up, and as you can see, we have awesome magnets. We also have our servos for both our elevator and our rudder. These are already pre-centered and pre-hooked up. We are going to want to test those when we go ahead and make our controls hooked up, but they should be really close, if not spot on. All right, so next we have our main wing piece. You're going to notice that this wing is much shorter than Trent Palmer's, and there's a good reason for that. We have two different wing conversions you can have. You can have the sport version, which is going to be the shorter wingtips with little nav lights on there. That's going to give you awesome aerobatics, or Trent Palmer's stall wing, which is much longer. It's going to give you really awesome flight characteristics, especially if you want that slow stall experience. Along with that, we also have our linkages and everything already pre-dialed in. Again, they should be spot on. The one thing to notice is that your arms of your servos are going to be kicked forward a little bit to provide you with differential aileron. That's totally normal. Don't adjust that out. We now have our hardware kit. Our hardware kit's going to have our prop, our main struts, our electronics package, and our tail wheel, and any screws that we need, and also our nose spinner. And our last thing is the thing that we honestly put just as much work in as our airframe for the Kit Fox, and that's the landing gear. Every time you see Trent Palmer land, he has that iconic where the landing gear flexes, the tires squeeze. We made sure that these tires were nice and spongy, not a hard foam or plastic that are going to take that impact, but also the landing gear is articulating. So when you put this on the airplane, it's going to flex and move just like Trent Palmer's will. Make sure this is all together. It should be in one piece, ready to pop into your fuselage. So now we've checked all our components. Our next step is to grab our fuselage, and we're going to start assembly with the fuselage and the landing gear. For this step, go ahead and grab your main landing gear kit. Also grab the tail wheel and the included 1.5mm Allen key in your hardware pack. So to put the landing gear on, we're going to go ahead and turn this upside down on our workbench and let the tail fall off the edge of the workbench so you don't dent it. Taking your main landing gear assembly, we're going to simply go ahead and line up the two metal pieces in the front pocket and gently rock back and forth as they squeeze down in place. You are going to have a friction fit in this, so don't try to force it down all at once. Just let us gently slide into place, and when it goes all the way to the bottom, take the front and the back of the landing gear flarings and you're going to just snap them in. You're going to see with no hardware at all, this just pops in. The nice thing is if you have an extremely hard landing, there's a good likelihood that your flarings are going to pop loose, your landing gear is going to fold back. That's going to keep you from doing any permanent damage to your Kit Fox. We've been pushing this limit. We've had some pretty wild crashes with the prototypes. The really cool thing is this plane takes a licking and the landing gear doesn't break. Now that we have our main landing gear assembled, go ahead and flip it over on its back. You're going to notice a small screw that the Allen key is going to need to loosen in order to make space for your tail wheel to slide in properly. So when you slide the tail wheel all the way down, when you tighten it up, the tail wheel will line perfectly with the rudder. So our fuselage is now done. We're going to go ahead and put this aside and put our attention towards the wings. So grab your wings and also grab the wingtips you prefer. I'm going to go ahead and use the stall wingtips. All we want to do is carefully grab our little leads for our battery. I'm going to go to the side that we need. In this case, I'm working on the right side, and then we're going to carefully go ahead and plug this in. You're not going to have overly large leads, and make sure you take your time to make sure that the red and the black line up with each other. Don't plug these in backwards. Our next step, we're going to go ahead and line up our carbon fiber pins. The magnets do the rest of the work. Let's go ahead and do the same process on the other side. Now that our wingtips are on, we're gonna go ahead and flip this over on its back carefully. We're gonna take our power Y that controls our LEDs, and we're also gonna take our Y harness for our servos, and we're gonna plug them in. Let's go ahead and do our servo leads first. With your Y harness, you wanna make sure that your signal lines up with each other. So in this case, we're gonna have the orange signal wire lining up with the white signal wire of our Y connector. White and orange indicate signal, brown or black is ground, red is power. Same on the other side. What this Y harness is going to do, it's going to take the signal from the receiver and it's going to send the same signal to both servos on the wings. For our LED lights, we're going to take our other Y connector that has a servo end on one side and then 2 JST connectors, and we're going to connect that lining up our red and our black. This other end is going to be reserved for our fuselage to power the tail light. So at this point, all of our electronics are ready to be hooked up, and in this case, we're going to be using our FT Aura 5. The reason I like the FT Aura 5 is it's not only going to give us some awesome stabilization, but it's also going to make features like tuning a breeze for you. Now, if you don't have the FT Aura 5, you can easily follow along with our manual and drop in any 4-channel radio. Now, if you have a 6-channel radio, you can independently talk to each one of your flaperons, and that's going to give you flap and aileron control. All right, so let's go ahead and grab our FT Aura 5, open up the package, and we'll drop this in. Now with the FT Aura 5 out of the box, we're not going to have to do any special programming. We're going to simply be able to drop this right in. The important thing is we want the pins towards the tail and the ports to be towards the nose. If you mount it this way, everything's going to be absolutely perfect for you as you plug it in. Included with our FT Aura 5 is this mounting tape. The only thing I want to do is pop out this little center. I'll be saving that for the satellite receiver. And I'm also going to cut up just a little tiny notch out of the mounting tape to let this guy sit right through here nice and flush. When you mount your FT Aura 5, make sure that you're mounting it perpendicular to the center seam line that you see running down the center of the fuselage. If it's kicked to the right or the left, it's going to mean that you're going to need to have a little bit of rudder adjustment and have to dial that out. Now I'm hooking up a Spectrum satellite receiver that's DSMX, but you don't have to use Spectrum. You can use protocols like FrSky, Futaba. You just have to have a serial satellite connection. If you're using a Spectrum satellite receiver, you're most likely going to be using the port B on your FT Aura 5. I'm going to use the extra little square that we have to put on the back of the satellite receiver, and I'm going to mount that on the side cheek of the fuselage. Alright friends, so we're breaking away from the current video you're watching to go ahead and give you kind of a very clear example. Oftentimes when we put the Aura board down inside the airplanes, it's very difficult to see exactly what I'm doing. So we came up with this little mock-up here to make hopefully assembly and plugging in your connections even easier for you. And then we're going to jump back in the video here. Currently what we have is what we've already done in the video. We have our Aura board installed correctly. And just to make sure, we want to make sure that our servo pins are facing towards the rear of the tail. In other words, the front of the nose is the front of the airplane. The pins are going to be pointing towards the tail side. Also, our orientation here is we want to make sure that our 2 pins on the front are facing towards the nose and that the whole board is not rotated 90 degrees to the right or left. If you install your board rotated wrong, the gyros aren't going to work properly for you and they're going to cause you some difficulty. So just take your time right now to make sure that it looks exactly like that. Now everything I'm going to be talking about is also included in our quick start guide, and we have some other really good videos if you want a little bit more explanation. But I'm going to go ahead and start with showing you our connections here. According to our pin mapping here, our first connection for our signal 1 port is going to be our ESC. Now whether you're flying a flying wing or whether you're flying something like the Kit Fox or the Widgeon, the ESCs are always going to be their connection for the motors, and that is going to go into signal port 1. So every servo connection has a common theme here, and that's going to be that the ground is going to be on one side, your power will be in the middle, and your signal will be on the other side. A ground is often indicated by a black or a brown wire. The power is almost always indicated by a red wire, and the signal will either be a yellow or a white. Make sure that your signal wire is lining up with the pins that have the little horseshoe signal sign. In this case, it's going to be on the pins closest pointing towards the center of the board. So I'm just going to go ahead and plug that into signal port 1 right here, and that's our motor connection. Our next is going to be the left wing. We're going to go ahead and plug that in right next. That'll go into signal port 2. The next one we're going to plug in is going to be our right wing. For signal port 4, we're going to go ahead and plug in our elevator. So let's see which one moves our elevator. So that's this one right here. Again, we're making sure all of our signal wires line up. This is the same whether you're using an Aura board or plugging it into a common everyday receiver. You always want your signals and your grounds to line up on the same pin and the appropriate pin. If you do get it backwards, it's not going to blow anything up. Basically, your power is in the center, so it's not going to hurt anything, but your radio, or in this case the Aura board, simply is not going to work for you. The last one in signal port 5 is going to be our rudder. And we've now made all of our connections. Now I'm going to go ahead and backstep just a little bit because oftentimes we have something like a Y harness here where we're going to take our left and right aileron and we're going to plug those both into this Y harness and we're going to be left with a single pin. This is very common with P&P airplanes where maybe you're included a Y harness to give you the reach to go to your control board or your receiver, or just to simply make hookup a little bit easier. For this case, what we'll do is we'll unplug servo port 2 and 3, which is our left and right ailerons, and then lining up the signal wires on both our Y harness and also the servos, we're going to go ahead and plug those into each other. Strongly recommend using a tiny little piece of tape to make sure you lock those in so they don't accidentally pull out or become loose in flight or during assembly. Now we have one single wire that we're going to plug in. All we need to do is simply plug it into signal port 2 or signal port 3. I prefer to do signal port 2 just because it's the first one I come across. There we go. Now for the nav lights on the Kitfox, we're going to go ahead and use our B port here that's located right here. Now take special note that the harness that comes with the Kitfox does not have a signal wire. That's because it only needs ground and voltage to work right. So make sure that you plug this in the right orientation where your ground is going to be on the bottom pin and your power is on the middle pin, and the pin facing the center of the Aura board will have no wires connected to it. So in this case, for like the Kitfox and the Widgeon, this is going to be the setup that you're going to have, and also many planes in the future. It simplifies things a lot. The only thing that you don't have easy control over is if you go into your configuration tool, there's a lot of really cool advanced features you can use on the Aura, like flaperon mixing, individual tuning of each individual aileron, things like that. But for the out-of-box configuration that we're showing you right now, this is going to be just fine. You're going to be able to do your sub trims, and the only thing that you may have to kind of go back on is if you have one aileron that's neutral and one aileron that's way up and you just can't get them to level out, whether it's too much reflex or too much droop, you're going to have to change your linkage. But that's something you should probably do anyway, just as a good practice to get the best tune and the best performance possible out of your aircraft. All right, at this point, we're ready to jump back into our video. I hope this section was helpful. Make sure everything looks the exact same as what you see here before moving on, and let's finish our build. Now that our Aura is plugged in, we're ready to go ahead and power this up and bind this. Now I'm going to be using my IX-12, but the really cool thing about the Aura is you can get all the functionality with the Aura, not out of a $500 transmitter, but it's something as simple as a sub $100 radio like the DXE. This is already programmed to have all the power in the Aura. It doesn't need the transmitter. For this use, I'm going to use my IX-12 because frankly I like it. Now since I'm using a Spectrum, I do need to have a couple radio setups to make the Aura work the best possible way it can. I need to set my aileron, my rudder, and my elevator to 125% travel each way, and I also need to make sure that my gear select switch is on a 3-position switch. For this case, I made my 3-position switch on switch C. To bind the Aura and the satellite receiver to our transmitter, we're first going to go ahead and power up our airplane without a prop on, wait about 15 seconds, and you should see your satellite receiver start to blink if it's an auto bind receiver. There's my flashing orange light, and I'm going to go ahead and press down the bind button on my transmitter, and we're bound. So we're now all bound up. You can see by the orange light and the fact that we can move all of our controls around, including our throttle, that we are set for our next step here. And that's going to be to establish our servo direction and make sure our gyros are working the proper way. We're going to go ahead and do that by holding both our bind and our trim button down for about 6 seconds. So there we go. You're going to know that you're in quick set mode by the flashing green light. At this point also, we're going to carefully put on our wings, just like you see here. So to make sure that our servos are moving in the right direction, what you want to do is have the tail pointing towards you. For the sake of this video, I'm going to go ahead and point the tail towards you so that way you can have the correct perspective that you should be seeing when you're setting up your airplane. Make sure that also that your transmitter is pointing with the antenna pointing towards the nose. When we check our aileron direction, we push our aileron to the right, we should see our aileron go up. In this case, our aileron goes down, which means we need to reverse that. When we pull back on the stick for our elevator should go up. In this case, the elevator goes down. We need to reverse now the aileron and the elevator. And the last thing we're going to check is our rudder. When we push our rudder to the right, it should go right. And that one works just fine. So the easy way to go ahead and switch the directions of both our elevator, aileron, or rudder is to simply hold the stick back for about 6 seconds. So in the case of the aileron, I'm going to go ahead and push the aileron to the right, hold it for 6 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now when I go ahead and move my stick to the right, the aileron moves to the right. We're going to do the same process now for the elevator. We're going to hold our elevator stick back for about 6 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now when we pull our elevator back, you can see that it goes up. So our rudder's working, our elevator's working in the right direction, and our aileron's working in the right direction. The next thing we want to see is make sure our gyros are working in the right direction. And for that, we're going to go ahead and put down our transmitter. We're going to pick up the airplane, and if I pitch the nose down, what I should see is the elevator go up. And it does. When I pitch it up, it goes down. For my ailerons, if I move the plane to the right, I should see it pitch left, and it does. To the right, and it does. For my rudder, when I yaw to the left, I see it pushing back to the right, and then vice versa. At this point, all of our axes are working good. Now, if you're a new pilot, you may want to go ahead and activate 6-axis mode. To do this, all you simply need to do while you're in quick set mode is hold down on that bind button for about 6 to 7 seconds. You're going to see a flashing light in all the control cycle for 2 cycles, and then at that point, your 6-axis mode will be activated. At this point, our 6-axis mode is now activated. We can go ahead and exit out of quick set guide by holding down on both the trim and the bind button for 6 seconds. We should see a rapid flu flashing light, and at that point, the whole system will reset. All right, so everything's working here. While I have my battery plugged in, it's gonna be really easy to go ahead and get my battery and my servo wire lead, go ahead and push to the front. So I'm just gonna go ahead and cut that through so I can grab it from the nose, and that's gonna pull my battery lead right on through here, and I can put my wing on. We're now ready to go ahead and fasten our wing in permanently. To do so, we're gonna go ahead and engage the leading edge and then push the trailing edge down flush with the fuselage. Included in our kit are these thumb screws, and all we simply need to do is pass it through the hole and tighten it by hand. Don't make this too tight, it just needs to be slightly snug. Our wing's now fastened. Before we move forward, let's go ahead and just do one last verification that everything works with our controls. We're gonna go ahead and move our stick to the right, aileron goes up. Pull back on the stick, elevator goes up. Move the rudder to the right, the rudder moves to the right. We're ready for our next step. Let's go ahead and put our struts on, and we can also disconnect our battery. To put on our struts, we're gonna carefully let the tail hang off the edge of our workbench and also our wings. Make sure you don't have anything that's sharp like screws or anything abrasive so you don't hurt your paint job. In our kit, you're gonna see a left and a right strut. The important thing to know is that the straight edge is actually gonna go towards the trailing edge, not towards the leading edge. So in this case, you'll see that the straight line is parallel to our rear aileron and it curves up towards the front. Let's go ahead and first take the included screws, and we'll first fasten this to the fuselage. And I like to leave this just maybe a half a turn loose until we get all of our screws down, and then we'll tighten it up. Notice I'm lifting up on the fuselage ever so slightly because this has a natural dihedral because of the struts, and it's gonna hold it with that proper dihedral and angle. I don't wanna have the table remove that. There we go. Once all 3 of our screws are threaded in, we'll go ahead and flip it vertical on the nose, and then we'll tighten the 3 screws down. Same process on the other side. All right, our struts are on. Let's go ahead and move towards the prop. It's really important whenever you're putting your prop on, make sure your battery's disconnected. Now that we have our struts on, we're gonna go ahead and install our prop. For our prop, we're obviously getting the propeller and also the spinner kit with the 2 little screws in here. Now before we install our prop, we're gonna wanna put our spinner back plate on. Simply slide this forward, and if it's a little bit tight, just kind of use a rotation motion, push it all the way against the stop of the motor. Next, we can go ahead and install our prop. One thing you're definitely going to need is the bushing insert, and all we need to do is simply go over it and find the one that friction fits, which is this one. And then we press that in to the rear part of the prop hub. With a little bit of a twisting motion, it'll slide right into place, and we're going to want to make sure that the trailing edge of the prop touches the pins on the back plate of the spinner. Next, we'll slide on our prop washer and then follow up with the nut. I always leave our prop nut just a little bit loose to make sure that I can install the spinner with no issues. Once we've established that, go ahead and tighten down your prop. The easy way to install the spinner is to actually thread the screws first into the spinner nose, and then take our spinner to our nose and tighten down the screws. Make sure you don't over tighten the screws on your spinner or it can stress the plastic. Everything's on nice and true. Our next step is to establish our CG with the installation of the battery. Now the CG is going to be decided on where you place your battery. This plane flies fantastic off of an 1800 milliamp or a 2200 milliamp 3-cell battery. The proper CG is 44 millimeters behind the leading edge, and the really cool thing about this, there's actually a little tiny injection mold line just about 40 to 42 millimeters back. So what you want to do is we're going to measure 40 millimeters back, and you're going to see it lines up beautifully with this little mold line right here. We're going to go ahead and place our fingers on that little mold line on both sides of the wings, And we're gonna move our battery backwards and forwards until we find our proper CG. Now it's really important, once you establish your proper CG, if you're flying a 2200 milliamp, put some little marks on there and mark what the capacity of your battery is. So that way as you switch to different batteries or different size batteries, you can instantly know where to put it to get the proper CG based on how you like to fly it. Now included in our kit, we have a little bit of Velcro. I'm gonna go ahead and stick that Velcro just behind the firewall. And let's see, I got prickly on my battery, so I'll go ahead and go with fuzzy on the fuselage. Alrighty, so we're just gonna go ahead and lay this down. Kind of let that go right up on the firewall there. And I've flown this a couple times before. A really good starting point is gonna be right around the very back of the firewall here. So I'm just gonna go ahead and lay that in. I'm gonna put my 2 fingers right at that 44 millimeter mark. It's actually a lighter battery than the other one, so I'm just gonna move that forward a little bit more. Right there. 44 millimeters. And that's perfectly level, if not just a touch down. So that's perfect, that's right where we wanna start. At this point, we're ready to take our FT Freedom Fox out to the field. A couple things you definitely wanna check. All your servos should be pre-centered, your ailerons should be pre-centered. Make sure you go through each control surface, and if you do need to adjust them, go ahead and loosen the linkage stopper, adjust it to neutral, and then go ahead and tighten that screw back down, and you'll be ready to go out in the field and fly. Now, as we mentioned before, flying the FT Kit Fox is exactly like flying Trent Palmer's real aircraft, which means you're gonna have to have some disciplines that maybe you're not used to when flying a typical RC airplane with oversized control surfaces. This plane is truly gonna offer an amazing scale experience, but it's also gonna require you to basically fly it just maybe a little bit different than what you're used to. Now, with takeoff, the important thing to know is that you don't wanna just rely on nothing but the motor's power to pull it into the air. You wanna fly it off the wings, not the motor. This is a common saying I oftentimes say when you're flying a more scale aircraft, where you want the aircraft to generate lift, and instead of flying like maybe a 3D aircraft where the motor can actually support its weight and pull it into the air and the oversized control surfaces keep control, you're going to want to have the airplane have adequate airspeed when taking off. Now, for your first couple flights, I strongly recommend just basically smoothly adding the throttle and then letting the tail gently come up. Use your rudder to keep it tracking nice and straight, and then gently with a little bit of back pressure, let it lift up in the air and gain its airspeed. As you get more and more comfortable with your takeoffs, you're going to be able to shorten this distance incrementally and eventually exponentially to get that awesome stall experience that you're used to. One nice thing is with the stall wings attached, this plane has an incredibly light wing loading and it has a really nice tendency to float. Now with flying, you're generally going to be flying around half throttle, and what I again strongly encourage you to do is to not fly this off the prop, which means throttling back as slow as you can and kind of keeping it pitched up. This plane's going to fly nice and level, and you're going to notice the tail is almost just a touch high on it when you're flying through the air. Generally about 2/3 to 60% throttle is my favorite throttle setting. It's going to penetrate very nicely. It's going to give you all the maneuverability and the performance you want when you're cruising around. Now, when flying this airplane through the air, you're going to have a really rewarding experience. The one thing that you will be able to do is a lot of those iconic maneuvers that Trent Palmer does, like those crabbing side slips that he oftentimes does with the Reno drag racing. Again, for the first time that you're going to be doing this, I would strongly recommend that you take it up for altitude and kind of feel how the power, the rudder, and the aileron all work together. This plane has a much slower roll rate than you may be typically used to with most planes similar to its size like the Timber. Because it has flaperons, you're going to notice that you have aileron control through much of your flight envelope, but your roll rate is going to be much slower. Now, if you want to do a lot more cutting aerobatics, go ahead and install your speedster wingtips. This is going to increase your wing loading and let the airplane fly a little bit faster, but also be a little bit more maneuverable on your roll axis. Whenever you do your first couple rolls, start again with high altitude, go ahead and gain speed. I usually use about 3/4 throttle to full throttle, pitch up to about a 40-degree angle for your first time, and try your first roll to the left. After you see what the roll rate is like, go ahead and do the same thing with a roll to the right. Now, to set up your landings, you're going to want to go ahead and carry about 15% throttle. Don't try to glide it in, and a very important note is don't pitch the nose up. Keep it nice and flat, and you don't need to dive it toward the ground, but you can practice those side slip maneuvers to kind of get it lower to the ground as you learn how to fly later on. Now, right before you touch the ground, oftentimes I'll use just a little bit of throttle to kind of manage my approach and recreate those iconic landings that Trent oftentimes does with his Kit Fox. The real Kit Fox actually needs the same amount of power to carry through on its landings that you'll be doing when you land the FT Kit Fox. All right, friends, I want to sincerely thank you for being part of the Flite Test family, and also thank you to our dear friend Trent Palmer for making the opportunity to build the FT Freedom Fox a reality. I really hope you guys have a really great experience building this, tuning this, and flying this, and I also can't wait to see what you guys experience and your feedback on this. Now, a really cool look into the future, we're not only going to be having the FT Freedom Fox available at our store and also a local hobby shop near you, but we're also going to be working on some really cool accessories that's going to make this plane even look cooler and more scale. All right, thanks for being part of the family. We'll see you next time. All right, we are done.